Angels and demons are not just myths. They're not symbols. They're real. They're very, very real. And they're way closer to us than we think.
The one I always mention when people ask about this, we had a case here in Pennsylvania, in rural Pennsylvania, a woman who was raised on a farm, had a high school education, only spoke English, and there was a number of exorcists there. It was a very rough case. So there was a number of exorcists there. She was interrogated in English, French, Latin, Lithuanian, and German, and properly responded to all the languages.
So clearly, my guardian angel knew how to pick up that car and put it back where it was supposed to be, instead of in a very busy intersection.
So people saw the car.
They did, and that's why it absolutely convinced me that I was like, oh my goodness, I can't be making this up.
Yeah, so the person went into the demonic state and was howling and saying terrible things to the priests, and then their back arched off the floor, and then they came off the floor briefly.
If any of this sounds unbelievable, these are just a few of the stories we're going to uncover in today's episode. In this conversation, I'm joined by Adam Bly, a certified church demonologist who's witnessed hundreds of exorcisms, and Debbie Georgiani, a Catholic radio host with a deep devotion to the angels. Together, we're going to explore firsthand accounts of encounters with angels and demons. We're going to dive into this hidden war between good and evil and equip you with practical tools to live in light in this invisible battle. Now, speaking of spiritual warfare, Adam, Debbie, and I will be at the Fullness of Truth Conference in Dallas, Texas, December 6th through 8th, 2024. The theme, spiritual warfare, and the lineup is incredible. We've got Father Carlos Martins, Father Dan Rehill, two experienced exorcists, Adam Bly, my guest today, Kathleen Beckman, who is an exorcism administrator, and even the directors of the hit film Nefarious. We'd all love to meet you there in person. Hope to see you there, where we're going to dive deep into this critical topic. Tickets are available now. Check out the link in the description. And since we're on the topic of spiritual warfare, let me share a practical way to bring peace and protection into your home with today's sponsor, Saint Candles. All right, guys, so listen up. So if you're married, you might be dating, or if you've got any kind of like woman in your life, a mom, here's a pro tip: candles. Like, seriously, candles. My wife, she is absolutely obsessed with candles. She has literally a whole closet full of them, different candles for different seasons of the year. But let me tell you, like, these candles, Saint Candles, are in a league of their own. They are incredible. What's really cool about this business, though, is that the founder actually started it by making one candle for a friend with a sick child. And that candle, dedicated to Saint Raphael, the patron saint of healing, actually turned into a whole collection of candles inspired by saints. And my wife's favorite is actually the Joan of Arc candle, and honestly, it smells like heaven in a jar, if I can put it that way. Oh, and then the packaging is also immaculate. No pun intended. So guys, stop buying those same old gift cards and grab a Saint candle this year. Use my code Cameron for 20% off of your first order at saintcandles.com. Trust me, you're going to look like a genius, and your wife is going to love you. Your house is going to smell great. In the words of Michael Scott, this is a win-win-win. All right, let's jump into this eye-opening conversation. If you've ever wondered whether or not angels and demons actually exist, this is the perfect episode for you. Debbie and Adam, it's great to have you here on Capturing Christianity. Let's start with you, Adam. What is the best evidence, if you could cite it, what is the best evidence for the existence of demons? We're going to talk about angels a little bit later, but let's start with the topic of demons. What is the best evidence that you're aware of?
Well, the church figured out centuries ago that you have to be very careful about people just claiming that a demon's bothering them and just taking their word for it, because there's medical problems, there's mental illness, there's con artists. And so the church figured out that the evidence that's required to conclude that somebody's actually possessed can take basically four forms. And that is knowing all languages, specifically languages you've never studied, being able to know secrets about people that you have no way of knowing. Not something that's on their Facebook, not something they've ever posted about. I'm talking about the most shameful sins that you've done in your life when nobody else was present and it wasn't recorded, and telling everybody in the room those in detail. That would be an example of hidden knowledge. Detecting the holy when it's not obvious. So if I have a relic of a saint in my pocket and I haven't mentioned it to anybody, but the demon says, oh, Saint so-and-so is here, and names that saint specifically. It's one example of many of detecting the holy. And then the weakest of the signs is strength beyond their condition in life. So incredible strength, and unlike an adrenaline rush, they don't get tired. Could be hours later, and they're still throwing 3 or 4 men around the room. So those are kind of and again, that was in 1614, and they had already figured a lot of that out before 1614. And we continue to use those kind of signs. Now, the church has never been interested in proving anything to the public about this. So we don't film or allow any recording of any kind, and that's to protect the dignity of the people. If you imagine your mother or your aunt was possessed, would you want people recording those sessions and possibly that leaking out? Of course not. Their life would be ruined. So the church is very careful to protect the dignity of people. So there's no place to go to watch video of that. The closest thing, and I know this is a long answer, but the closest thing is the audio recordings from the exorcism of Anneliese Michel in Germany. And the only reason those audio recordings got into the public domain is because they were used in a court proceeding and therefore became public property because they were evidence in a court. So there's no proof that you can go look at and decide for yourself if it convinces you. There's just the work that is done. And I enumerated already basically what those things that we look for are. Outside of possession, it's very hard to prove that demons exist because they're not in a body that you can interrogate or force them in some way to show that it's more than just that person. When they're not in a body, they have no physicality. Angels, fallen angels, they have no physicality. They can move physical things, but they themselves, there's nothing there to measure with a scientific device, for instance. So I hope that answers your question. I know it's a big question and it's a reasonable one.
When it comes to different types of proofs, you mentioned audio recordings. There's audio recordings of this person, allegedly possessed. I personally take testimony pretty seriously. Like, I think the testimony of these exorcists who have seen these possessed individuals and have seen some of the signs that you've mentioned, I take those very seriously. And this kind of stems from my background in apologetics. So I take the testimony of people, especially when it comes to, say, the resurrection of Jesus. I take the testimony that we have in the form of the Gospels, the people that they've interviewed. Luke says that he interviewed eyewitnesses. And we've got evidence from Luke's Gospel of his having done that, interviewed eyewitnesses. So I take that kind of stuff very seriously, and I think courts do as well. You've got to take the testimony of eyewitnesses very, very seriously. And so that's, can you share any eyewitness testimony that you might have yourself, or any accounts that you've heard from other people that have witnessed these things themselves?
Well, yeah, I've been doing this for just about 20 years. I've probably been at, I don't even know, between 1,000 and 2,000 exorcisms. I've seen everything except levitation, which is not one of the classic signs, but it does happen. And that happened recently in one of our current cases, but I wasn't there. One of our exorcists was there, so I didn't get to see it. And I'm not asking to see it. But so sure, the one I always mention when people ask about this, we had a case here in Pennsylvania, in rural Pennsylvania, a woman who was raised on a farm, had a high school education, only spoke English, and there was a number of exorcists there. It was a very rough case. So there was a number of exorcists there. She was interrogated in English, French, Latin, Lithuanian, and German, and properly responded to all the languages. More recent case, a person was
if we could pause on that one really quickly, and I just wanted to ask this quick follow-up on that one. How do we know that she didn't previously know the other languages that she spoke?
Well, she grew up in that town. She was known to the actual exorcist, who happened to be the pastor of that parish. Again, she had a high school education, grew up on a farm. She did not study other languages. People had known her her whole life. And to study that many additional languages probably would be a considerable task unless you had a pretty incredible gift for languages. So yeah, nobody was aware of her ever doing that. And of course, she denied having done that because she only spoke English like most people living in that part of the state.
All right. Yeah. Feel free to continue. You were about to give another case.
Yeah, there's a ton of them. One interesting one, we were in Oklahoma working on a case, and there was a spirit that was a mute spirit. It wouldn't speak out loud, but it would write answers, which some of them do that for whatever reason. And it was writing out answers in a strange language. And I had seen here and there enough about Icelandic to kind of recognize it, that it has an incredible number of consonants and the words are very long and convoluted. So I guessed that it was Icelandic. And I happened to have a friend through the internet who lives in Iceland and speaks the language, obviously native. And so I asked them if they would translate it. And this was a woman from Oklahoma. And so, yeah, my friend translated it for us. And I didn't tell her where it was from. Just asked if she could translate it because I didn't want to freak her out. And she said, yeah, that's Icelandic, but it's odd. She said, that's kind of like the grammar we would have used about 600 years ago. So if you think of the equivalent of like writing an old English, that like medieval English where it's almost like it's English, but it's almost so different that some words you don't understand. She said it was kind of the equivalent of that. So this person was writing in Icelandic in a grammar that was from about 600 years ago. That's pretty obscure. And Icelandic is not one of those languages where it's like, well, did she study it in high school? You don't study Icelandic in high school here in the United States. You just don't. And even if you want to study Icelandic, it's a brutally difficult language to learn. That's one example.
But you also don't learn the grammar from 600 years ago, Icelandic.
Yeah, exactly. More recent ones. One of our current cases, it's a pretty rough case, and I've asked people on the radio to pray for us because it's been pretty rough. That's one where there was levitation. They're speaking.
Well, why don't we start there? The levitation account that just occurred recently. Why don't we start with that one?
Well, I wasn't there.
If you're okay sharing it.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't there. We weren't sure that the person was possessed yet. It was actually a house blessing as a kind of a first step in the case to see if that could resolve some of the manifestations in the house. And so the person went into the demonic state and was howling and saying terrible things to the priests, and then their back arched off the floor, and then they came off the floor briefly. So that's when they called me and said, there's more going on than a house case, please come over. And that's kind of how the case started. But one of our exorcists in training that visits us from another part of the church, another diocese, because we do that all the time. We have people come in for training, picked up enough Arabic in some time that they spent in that part of the world. And this person grew up in the South here in the United States, relatively limited education, from a population that is often impoverished in terms of educational opportunities. Basically, there's some cultural issues, I think, in terms of the quality of the education that they got, maybe wasn't the best. But one of the many voices, which included Italian coming out of the person, but also Arabic. And he knew enough that he recognized it and basically said in Arabic, oh, you know how to speak Arabic. And whatever was speaking out of this person immediately was like, oh, yes, in Arabic was saying like, oh, yes, you do too pretty well. And went on to have a conversation with him in Arabic. And I don't know the first thing about Arabic. So I didn't know, but I asked him afterwards. And Yeah, so they were speaking a number of languages. We've had a person speak Korean fluently. We've had with a native who lives here but grew up in Korea, so spoke it fluently enough that they seem to be a native speaker, but they grew up here in Pittsburgh and don't speak Korean. It goes on and on. Sometimes it's ancient languages, Greek. Sometimes it's oddball stuff like Japanese. Sometimes they do it just to be arrogant and put on a show. Sometimes they do it to avoid answering the question. So you'll say, the exorcist will say, in the name of Jesus, tell me whatever it is. And they'll answer it, but they'll answer it in a language that nobody knows. So technically they're answering the question, but they're kind of playing a game. And so then they'll have to be ordered to speak in English. But yeah, there's innumerable examples. The languages thing is the most common.
Yeah, so beyond the sort of contemporary accounts that you've just outlined here from eyewitnesses, in some of these accounts you haven't personally seen yourself, which again I think is okay. But beyond that, are there any historical examples? Are there any other type of evidence that we could appeal to in order to support the claim that demons do in fact exist?
Well, I mean, these same signs in terms of the church's history have been going on for a long time because nothing ever changes. So, you can find records of similar encounters going on all the way back to the Middle Ages and earlier. A lot of it is fairly obscure stuff, but when I've come across it in terms of like when I was researching for the book, The History of Exorcism, I came across a number of these kind of anecdotes that it's often the languages, sometimes it's the secret sins. That has happened in terms of being recorded a lot more since maybe what we would call modern times as opposed to medieval times. Citing that a particular author recorded that this happened. I don't know how much more helpful that would be for somebody as opposed to hearing directly from a person who's alive and has actually seen it. If it was me, I'd be more interested in that so I could judge the character of that person and see whether I want to believe that they're telling the truth. People that are dead and gone and have written down that they've seen these things, I can dig up specific references for you later that you could include as a bibliography with this talk. But I'm not sure how much that's going to help people. I mean, it might.
Well, I was going to say one underrated piece of evidence that I think people should take more seriously. And when I say people, I'm really talking about Christians who are skeptical of this, because that actually was me for a while, pretty much up until I started talking directly with exorcists myself and started to interview them. And I was like, wait a second, this is pretty crazy. But one underrated piece of evidence is just the Bible itself. Like there's accounts in there. Jesus was an exorcist himself. And so if you're a Bible believing Christian, again, doesn't matter which denomination you are, as long as you believe in the Bible, then you've gotta be committed to the existence of demons.
Well, sure. So 7 of the major gospel accounts of Jesus's miracles that were kind of used as proofs of his divinity, 7 out of the miracles that are recorded, major miracles, are exorcisms. Secondly, he not only did them and it was recorded, but he ordered the church to go cast out demons explicitly. So if you're going to take a position that demons don't exist and say you're a Christian, you're in a very interesting spot because you essentially have to deny Jesus and then you have to disobey his direct command. And if you're denying the words and the actions of Jesus and you're disobeying his command, are you really Christian? Because you're kind of playing a strange game of, well, he was a Stone Age guy and didn't know what he was doing. It was epilepsy. But I'll also simultaneously believe he was God and is my Lord and Savior and did a supernatural thing for me to be saved from being lost spiritually. Like, you're in a very weird place if you're going to deny Jesus and disobey Jesus and then claim you're a Christian. I find that very odd.
Debbie, do you have any thoughts on this topic before we start to shift gears and talk about angels?
Yeah, actually, as I was listening to Adam explain this, it just made me think of all the times that on our radio show we get these questions all the time, and this real interest in how we are to believe and understand and accept these demonic spirits. How are we supposed to fit them in with our daily life? And that's what I think sometimes it's not a denial of it or a rejection of it. Wouldn't you say, Adam? It's how does this even work with, is this going to affect me? I want to keep them far away from me. I want to get on with my life. I don't know where to put them into my daily existence. Now, Adam, you have greatly explained it all to us about temptation and the different levels of what we are allowed to and permitted by God to experience in order to get us stronger. So that makes sense. And I think we can really then start to place where they are in our view. Wouldn't you say, Adam, that's really, it's not so much a rejection, it's more like, what do we do with them?
I think, for some people, it's just the analogy of learning about viruses for the first time kind of applies. When you first learn that diseases exist and every doorknob that you touch has bacteria and viruses on it, suddenly it's like you get scared, like, there's this invisible thing that could really mess me up, and it's kind of everywhere, but I can't see it, and I don't know how to protect myself, and I don't really understand it. And most people are at that place with demons where they say, there's this horrible thing that can kind of infect me and get in my life and destroy me. I want to avoid it, but I don't really understand it. And so I'm very scared. Excuse me. I'm very kind of scared, and I don't know enough to be at peace, do what's necessary and then be at peace with it. That's some people. But I think there's a lot of people that are kind of cafeteria Christians who say, well, I'm comfortable with Jesus and I'm comfortable with, I'm going to get to heaven and that's great. But I don't really believe in the devil or demons. That was a misunderstanding, or it was an analogy for the evil in human hearts. I think there are people that are either so materialistic that they don't want to believe in a spiritual world at all, or there's people that are so scared of it they just want to pretend it doesn't exist. Right.
But Adam, those same people you're talking about, because I know some of those people, they actually do believe in the good angels. So it's interesting how they reject the fallen angels, but they believe in the good angels. So what do you say to that?
I suspect those are the people that are in the category where it's so scary they just want to pretend it's not there.
Okay.
Because they don't understand it. Yeah.
So why don't we now switch and start to address the topic of angels? I mean, we've heard I think one of the differences between these two categories, and Debbie, maybe correct me if I'm wrong about this, is that in the case of demons, we've got this phenomena called demonic possession. We've also got vexation and oppression and stuff. But what we have are these sort of physical manifestations that give us some indication that demons exist. Whereas with angels, you hear stories, some people will say that they saw an angel somewhere. Someone will say that someone rescued them and that they thought that was an angel, right? But we don't have the same sorts of corroborative evidence, I don't think, in those cases as we do in the case of demons, where we've got, 6 or 7 people. I don't know how many actually, Adam, I don't know how many people are usually in attendance at an exorcism, but you have this group that is there witnessing all the same thing, and they see it and they're like, whoa, this is crazy. But as far as angels are concerned, what do we have there, Debbie? I'll just pass it over back to you.
Well, and you're talking about the good angels, the holy angels. And so the holy angels are not going to have those, they're not going to take over a body. the way the demons do and do the kind of destruction. That's not what they were meant, and that's not what they were created to do, the holy angels. The holy angels are messengers, they're servants of God. So they are beholding the face of God and doing the mission work that God has instructed them, and they have agreed to do. Okay. And so they are, but they do manifest. But when they do show themselves, oftentimes it is like putting, Peter Kraft, a wonderful theologian and philosopher, did a great job in describing this. And I thought this was excellent. So I need to give him credit. And he said in one of his books, Angels and Demons, he said that it's when they manifest, it's like they put on a costume. So they put on a costume of a human, person, and they do the work that God has intended them to do. They fulfill that mission, that particular situation, and then they're out of the scene. They're done. The holy angels are really, if you study holy angels, you will realize that they are very focused on their role as servants of God. They do not want to and do not go beyond that. We as human beings are fascinated by them because holy angels, people love them across all denominations, faith, belief systems, everything. Angels are just everybody seems to figure out a way to bring them into their lives, and they feel very good and comforted by even the word angel, which a lot of people don't even realize that it means messenger. So right there is an indication that they are on a mission from God. But my point is that angels are accepted by pretty much everyone, because it's a comforting, a feel-good effect of these spiritual beings. I don't know if Adam, if you wanted to add anything on that, but did I say it correctly about the difference between the fallen angels and the holy angels?
Yeah, because the fallen angels want you to pay attention to them, and they want to distract people from God, and they want to say, look at me, look at me, look at me. And they want our minds on them, and they want us to pay attention to their antics because they're trying to distract from God. The holy angels, they only point towards God. They don't want attention. They don't want to be even talked about a whole lot. Like, they're not putting on a show for the world because they don't want to distract us from God. And they know that there's a tendency in humans to want to worship them, or to be in such awe of them that we start giving that fear of God, the healthy fear of God, to them, which is why when they appear in the Bible, often the first thing they say is, don't be afraid. Yeah. And sometimes the person will be described in the encounter as being rolled up in a ball on the ground, weeping. And I've seen that once. If you want to hear a story of, a situation I was present for, if that's interesting to you. So sure. I was speaking at a small conference up in New England many years ago, and one of the buildings on the land where the conference was at was supposedly troubled spiritually. There had been manifestations there, and while we were there, they asked me if I would pray at that building. I'm just a lay person, but I've been asked to do house blessings and things like that. So I was there, and there was a woman who was at the conference, nice woman, but a woman who, in my opinion, it's misguided, thinks that they're a psychic and would hold themselves out as being a psychic to other people. And that's kind of part of their identity. Nice person, but all that stuff to me is misguided. So anyway, I was there, I was praying. A number of other people were there, quiet, and I felt something bad kind of show up while the prayers were going on. And, you just feel the kind of spiritual resistance, the ugliness, the bad vibe, if you want to put a 60s phrase on it. And for me, with holy angels like guardian angels or angels that help with ministry, I'm just very direct with them if I ask them to do something, and I've done this a couple times. So I just said, hey, would you guys take care of that? Very quietly. I wasn't like trying to let other people know what I was doing. I just figured, because we're not supposed to name angels because we don't have authority over them. So we're not supposed to name them. So I don't know what their names are. I just said, would you guys take care of that? The woman who was a psychic crumpled to the floor to my right. She crumpled to the floor, immediately curled up in a ball, covered her face, and was weeping loudly, rocking herself and weeping like inconsolable. And I immediately, stopped and turned and like knelt down and put my hand on her back. And I'm like, you okay? Are you okay? And she's rocking and weeping. And she said, I saw them. I saw them. I saw them. I'm like, you saw who? She said, when you said, would you guys take care of that? It was as if they stepped out from behind something, but not anything in the room, just kind of became visible to her for a moment. And she said they were so powerful and so strong and so overwhelming to her that she was immediately curled up in a ball on the floor crying, not out of fear, but out of like being overwhelmed by what she saw. And looking back on it, I think that was a gift that God gave her, I think, to maybe reinforce the advice I was trying to give her about getting away from the psychic stuff. But it was very much like what you see described in the Bible. And I've not seen angels myself. I've seen them do things. And I'll give you one more quick story. I was working on a case in Philadelphia, heavy oppression case, not possession, but heavy oppression for the exorcist of that archdiocese at the time. And there was a guy who was feeling crushing weight on his feet. He would feel crushing weight like bags of cement being put on his shoulders. When he would try to sleep, he would feel the crushing weight pushing his body down to where he had spinal damage. He was a nurse by trade. Anyway, so this was happening while I was just praying for him. And I remember saying, would you guys pull that off his foot? And he was sitting, 5 or 6 feet away from me and in a rolling office chair, hardwood floors. I was the only other person there. And suddenly his leg went up as if you were going to pull the boot off of somebody. His leg went up in the air as if some very tall man had grabbed his foot. And then he was pulled across the room in front of me, went 5 or 6 feet across the room, not pushing himself with his other foot, just sitting there with his leg dragging him, but there was nothing there that I could see. His leg's just up in the air. And then his leg dropped and bumped on the floor. And he said, it's gone. That feeling of crushing. So I've seen them do physical things at request. And I've seen them show themselves to somebody once that caused an involuntary, complete emotional breakdown.
Wow. Debbie, what, do you have any similar stories? I know that you do this for a living, right? You talk to...
Yeah. Well, let me just back up a little bit. I've had a strong devotion to angels since I was 8 years old because my aunt is a Dominican sister, a nun. She's still alive and well in her late 90s in New Jersey, and she had always has a strong attachment to the angels and taught about angels in school. And I picked that up as a small child, but as I got older, I decided to go into a deep dive study on angels, and I really never stopped. I learned something new every day, even just from stories that come in. Even when Adam tells the situations that are happening in the exorcism world, it actually confirms a lot of things I know to be true about the holy angels, because you can flip it, right? And so it's the first encounter, major encounter that I have had with my guardian angel, and I just know it to be true, but I don't really talk about it a lot on radio because it's like, oh, look at me, I've had these encounters with angels, so I don't really talk about it a lot. But since Adam is bringing this up, I think it's important to realize that oftentimes they deliver a message. It is very clear, And it's usually to protect and to guard and to guide and to help that individual. And if you go back to Psalm 91, God's protection, you'll see right in the middle of the Psalm, it talks about the angels are there to guard you and guide you. And so they're on a mission to help us get back home to God. That's their goal, is to help us and to protect us at various times when the world is coming at us in a very sharp, horrible way. And the demons are tempting us and coming at us. They are there to really help to illuminate our mind and help to strengthen our will. And so that's a beautiful thought. But when they actually go into action, it is extraordinary. You know, it's not of this world. You know, it's very different. You don't really understand exactly where the voice is coming from, but you know that it's a voice that you need to listen to. It is as clear as a bell that it's a voice that you must obey and understand it. And my very first encounter was with when I was 19 years old. And I don't know if you guys remember this. Cameron, I think you might be a little too young to remember this, but there were outdoor ATM machines outside of grocery stores. We used to have outdoor ATM machines. They were very dangerous because there was not a lot of security. You had a parking lot right there. People could, assault somebody else and then take off real quickly. Well, I was 19 years old and I was getting some money out of an ATM machine late at night. It was about 10 o'clock, but I was outside of a well-lit grocery store. And so I thought I was safe. And I was up at the ATM machine and I could feel a very strong, big man right behind me, and I could feel him completely behind me. And I thought, oh my goodness, I'm about to be attacked. I knew it. I just knew it. That those senses went up inside of me. And as clear as a bell, Cameron and Adam, as clear as a bell, the voice, which I believe was my guardian angel, that I knew I had to obey quickly. I couldn't even think. The voice said, "Scream as loud as you can." That's what the voice, I'm just telling you what the voice said. Scream as loud as you can. And that's not like me because I was in a grocery store area outside. I turned around and I screamed this loud, and I don't know where this voice came from inside of me, but it was so loud. It scared this man so badly, he ran.
Wait, so you didn't know that he was actually behind you? Like you hadn't turned around yet?
Had not turned around, couldn't see him, but I could just feel he was pressing up against me. Mm-hmm.
You could feel that he was there, but you hadn't looked around. Did you hear him at all? How did you know that he was there? He was
so quiet. I just knew he was right behind me and ready to do whatever.
That would have been super awkward. You were just like standing there getting your money out of the machine, and then you just turn around and start screaming and stuff.
Exactly, because think about it. When remember ATM machines, you would stand a couple feet behind somebody else, right? So can you imagine this crazy lady screaming at you at the top of her lungs right in your face? But when I turned around, we were nose to nose. That's how close he was to me. But I had such an unbelievable, I can't explain it, an unbelievable confidence because I knew it was my guardian angel who said, do it now, do it right now. And I did it. I didn't even hesitate. And of course, afterwards, I thanked my guardian angel and but and here's how you know, I believe when you've had a message from your guardian angel or a guardian angel has stepped into action, you get that authoritative understanding, that voice that you need to follow. You follow it, you end up hopefully being safe. It prevents some tragic situation or something of that nature, an accident. And then you go on with your life like nothing happened. Now, this just happened to me. I got in my car, I drove off like nothing happened. Now, that's not normal. Typically, if somebody's been shaken up like that, right, you would go to a friend's house, you'd go somewhere and go, I don't know, I'm not feeling real good about this. This doesn't feel good. It was like nothing happened. It was the oddest thing. And there have been a few different encounters like that, where I was almost in an intersection, really horrible car accident, and same thing. I knew that my guardian angel was in control, and then I had confirmation afterwards when the gentleman knocked on my window of my car, and he says, "You're not going to believe what happened. You were right in the intersection. We can't figure out what happened. Your car was taken back to the line, so that you weren't in the intersection." So I was in the intersection, and then the car was taken back, and it was, I didn't do it. And people actually saw it. And I had fallen asleep at the wheel because I'd come home late from work and I'd fallen asleep. So clearly my guardian angel knew how to pick up that car and put it back where it was supposed to be, instead of in a very busy intersection.
So people saw the car.
They did. And that's why it absolutely convinced me that I was like, oh my goodness, I can't be making this up. I literally fell asleep. I went into a very busy intersection. I was apparently, according to the witnesses, I was in the intersection. And the next thing you know, my car was back at the line where it's supposed to be, at the start of the intersection, not in the intersection. Now, so I didn't put it into reverse. I was asleep. So there you go. And that was another encounter that I just knew. And again, after it was over, I drove home like I was okay. I didn't have I wasn't shaking or anything. It was the oddest thing. But the biggest message, I think, real quickly, that I received, it's not about me. I'll tell you why I know this is true for a lot of people. When you start to accept the holy angels and you start to be devoted to the holy angels and respect their mission and acknowledge their mission and teach people about what they are called to do by God, they very much are active in your spiritual life. It's just the way it is. I have heard hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of stories over 13 years, and people will tell the same thing. And it's like they're telling my story. So it's not about, oh, look at me, I'm, so great. I have this great relationship with my guardian angel. I really love my guardian angel, and my guardian angel has a big work and I think works overtime trying to take care of me. And I really respect my guardian angel, and my guardian angel has a mission given by God. And I acknowledge that, or I try to acknowledge it on a daily basis. But the biggest thing that really convinced me that my guardian angel was active in my life is in 1994. I remember it vividly. I can tell you exactly where I was. It was 1:00 in the morning. I was sound asleep. And you guys probably don't know this about me, but I love to sleep. I always loved to sleep, even as a little kid. And so I go into a deep sleep and I wake up, 7 hours later, and I just love it. But at this one particular evening, I was sound asleep at 1:00 in the morning. I was literally pushed into a sitting up position. So I was sound asleep, pushed into a sitting up position, and clear as a bell, a voice said to me, "You are going to get sick." Now, at the time, I was 30 years old. I was running mini marathons. I was in great shape. I had a young 4-year-old child. I was on top of the world. And I sat up and I heard this voice say, "You are going to get sick." And I remember saying, not out loud, I remember saying, "What does that mean? Am I going to die?" And they said, "No, you're not going to die. You're going to be okay, but you need to let your mother know." So they came as messengers to tell me that I was going to get sick, but mainly to tell my mother, because they knew my mother couldn't handle it if she knew I was about to be diagnosed with cancer.
So this involved information that you didn't have access to at the time. You just sat up and you knew that you were going to get sick.
Oh yeah, and majorly sick, like a cancer diagnosis. And I was super.
And this was before you'd received the diagnosis or even had any testing or.
Absolutely nothing. But believe, if you saw me when that happened, you'd be like, "Well, that's ridiculous. She's as healthy as they come. She eats healthy. She works out every day." I mean, it was unbelievable. And I was young. I was 30 years old.
Did you go and get tested immediately, or did you?
No. So here's the interesting thing. They actually told me that I needed to tell my mother I was going to get sick, It was going to be a couple months after they came after my guardian angel shared with me at 1:00 in the morning, and that I needed to tell my mother that I was going to get sick, but I wasn't going to die, and she needed not to be worried, because I think she would have gotten very sick and could have possibly been in shock over it. 2 months, pretty much to the day, 2 months to the day, I was walking through the preschool with my son, and a nurse at the preschool, who's a friend of mine, she says, "Oh, you've got a lump in your throat. You should have that checked." I said, "What are you talking about?" She says, "You should have that checked." I said, "I don't have a lump in my throat." She goes, "Yeah, you do. You have a lump in your throat." I went that day to get it checked. It turned out that they needed to do a biopsy. It came back suspicious. They ordered another biopsy. It came back again suspicious. They had me go into surgery, and it was cancer of the thyroid. And here's the odd part about it. You call it a coincidence if you want, but here's the thing. Angels have a way of sometimes confirming that they have given a message. My doctor's name the surgeon's name was Dr. Engel, and Engel in German means angel. And so I knew right away that this had to go back to that encounter that I had 2 months earlier. So I knew I was going to get sick. I knew it was going to be serious, and it was cancer, and it started to spread through my body. But I knew I wasn't going to die. And I knew I had to tell my mother that I was going to be okay. And thank goodness I did. So
the level of sickness that you experienced, I mean, they got rid of the growth, right, on your thyroid. Right. And then, but you said it spread over the rest of your body, or it started to spread?
It started to spread, but they were able to get it with radioactive iodine. So they really worked hard to make sure they got as much as they could possibly get, and then to monitor me. And so I'm alive here today, since 1994. But my point is, again, here's the key. When I sat up in that 1:00 at 1:00 in the morning position, now my husband was right there sleeping, and my child was in the next room. Don't you think after getting a message like that, you would pick up the phone and wake up your mother, or wake up your husband, or call somebody and say, "Oh my goodness, I just got a really serious, message here"? Not at all. Went right back to sleep, and I slept the rest of the night. This is why I know that the angels are so active in people's lives. They don't even recognize it oftentimes. But when they do, it becomes very personal to them. And they understand that God has an angel for each and every one of us. They're not recycled. They're not, this particular angel is assigned to you from conception all the way till hopefully you get into heaven. And so, and then they transition into they don't have to protect and guard you and guide you in heaven. So they're your heavenly companions there. But I will tell you that that's why it becomes very personal to people, and they get very protective of the angels, because when you have had encounters like this, you just believe there's no, and people do believe in angels because they like to feel comforted. That's why you see those figurines, those ceramic figurines of angels all the time. And people love that. They put angel decorations all over their house, and that's cute, but they're much bigger than that. And they're much stronger than that. And they're just, their mission is so intense, and we don't recognize it enough.
Well, I was going to say, why don't we get into some of that? Before we started recording this, we were talking about the angelic doctor himself. Why don't we bring him into the picture? And because he's one of the early, I don't know that he qualifies as a church father, right? St. Thomas Aquinas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Does he qualify as a father, even though he was 10th century, 11th, 12th century?
1200s. Yeah. Well, he's a doctor of the church, and he is so highly regarded as the person that really has shaped the theology on angels, and because of his Summa Theologia and other writings, he was able to tap into the different elements of the angels as best as he could kind of absorb and to put out there in writing. But I will tell you that there's so much we don't know about the angels, and we're not going to know until we get to heaven, because I think they're much bigger and stronger than we ever give them credit for, and we don't really understand completely their role. However, we do have indication through the doctors of the church, like St. Thomas Aquinas or St. Augustine or St. Jerome or St. Basil, that we're able to kind of figure out where they can fit into our spiritual lives. And when they do, your spiritual life changes forever. It's a spiritual game changer. That's why I have devoted my whole life. And that's why there's people that actually are consecrated to the angels and they do the work of the angels. There's priests that are devoted to the holy angels. I mean, it goes on and on. It's an untapped, I believe, spiritual resource because we don't know exactly how to fit them in. Again, just like we don't know how to understand the demons on the negative side and where it fits into our spiritual lives, we don't know how to place the angels, the holy angels, in as well.
Yeah, Thomas Aquinas used the kind of methods that are developed in philosophy in terms of systematic thinking and trying to work through logically, from the facts that we do have in Scripture, and then kind of deriving what he could from that and extrapolate what he could from that. And he was brilliant. He was primarily a philosopher and a theologian. And then he applied all of those tools to everything, not just the angels. The Summa Theologia is kind of like a summary of theology. He covered everything. But he did a really good job. Like, for instance, the idea between infused knowledge and learning. So you and I, all three of us, when we were 12, we knew a lot less than we know now. And as we went through school, we learned and, different topics and hopefully developed a stronger mind in general beyond just the facts we were picking up. And Thomas, based on his reasoning, we don't have time to unpack it all, very interestingly pointed out that the angelic mind isn't like ours. It's not limited the way ours is, where we need new experiences in our memory to broaden our minds and become stronger. The angelic mind is infused with the information that it needed at the moment of its creation, and they have no need to learn additional information because God gave them everything they would need for all of time to do the tasks they were created to do. And he calls that infused knowledge because the holy angel will never learn some new facts and then reevaluate its choices. It does have free will, like we do. But when they made their choice, for instance, at the beginning of whether to serve God or to deny God, that was a permanent choice. The fallen angels can't one day say, it's been a few million years. I've thought about it a lot. I've realized I was wrong. Please forgive me. They're never going to come to a new conclusion because their mind will never develop and grow.
Right.
Not in a sense that they're dumb, but in a sense that they were given everything they needed. So, and the holy angels are never going to fall for two reasons. One, they made their choice based on knowledge that they had. And then secondly, they were given the beatific vision after they said yes. And so because they're in the beatific vision, it doesn't make sense that they could then deny God and say, oh, God isn't real, or we're better than God if you're staring at God. So they're never going to fall. And he just kind of developed a number of interesting things about them. And I've seen evidence of what he's talking about. If you look at the transcripts of the way the fallen angels have operated, the conversations that are recorded in the old books, like Middle Ages kind of stuff, and then I see the way they talk and manipulate and their turns of phrase today in my own life every Friday, I see the exact same thing. Like, I'll read these old transcripts from like the 1300s, and I'm like, oh, I know where this is going. He's going to do this next. And then the demon does exactly what I know he's about to do because they don't change. They don't develop new methods.
Right.
It's the same old classics just played over and over and over again. They're not creative creatures.
Right.
I was going to build on that and just say, you were talking about this sort of innate, I don't know, infused knowledge, and I feel like it'd be important and helpful maybe to outline how that's like you said that we have a mixture of the two, right? We have this sort of knowledge that we get over the course of many years and through experiences and whatnot, but we also do have innate knowledge. I think that also extends to the animal kingdom as well. Like you see a baby giraffe who's just born and it immediately gets on its feet and starts doing things. And I feel like that's a sort of innate knowledge that it has as well. Whether or not that's actually knowledge in the capital K sense is going to be, I guess, a little bit controversial. But the same kind of principle, right? The underlying principle is there in the case of humans, where we are born with some sort of innate knowledge that we just are sort of given. And there's nothing super magical about that at all. It just seems very straightforward. Like we've got this mixture, but in the case of what you're saying, and in the case of angels, it's just the mixture is different, right? It's basically just all on one side.
Yeah, it's all on one side. We certainly have instincts, and then we have strong potential. Like, for instance, with language, and my background is in studying the brain and psychology. So I'm not trying to be too technical, but that's where this is coming from. So with language faculties, for instance, we have, I think it's like 26 different phonemes that our body and brain can produce, the sounds that we build words from, right? And depending on the language that you learn, you only retain the phonemes that are used within the language that you learn. And the ones that you don't use as an infant and a toddler, as you're learning your language, they get pruned from the nervous system and you can never get them back. And this is why there are some countries where the people have a real hard time with certain sounds that to us seem normal, like the sound L. For a Japanese person, they can't make the sound for L. So when they say lobster claws, they'll say robster claws, usually, because literally the system can't produce that because it's not used in their language, and so it was pruned from their nervous system. So my point is we have a lot of potential that makes it easy for us to develop certain what Thomas would call faculties or skills or abilities. But the angels just have the entire ability infused into them. So instead of having the potential to learn language, they just know all human languages from all of history instantly at the moment of their creation. There's no work for them. They don't have to study them. They don't have to think about how to translate this for this person. They just instantly know it.
And Cameron, may I just add something, since Adam just mentioned St. Thomas Aquinas again, and you were spot on. I just want to make sure for your viewers, although St. Thomas Aquinas is not considered like a church father, he's a doctor of the church, and he pulled from the church fathers. So he referenced the church fathers for his work on angels, and then he is held as a doctor of the church. So he's held up so high for us to use his writings to be able to understand better truth of our faith. Okay. And so because of that, when you talk about angels, because he is considered the angelic doctor, there's no real expert on angels, but he's the closest thing to it. You usually will say the church fathers and St. Thomas Aquinas. So they kind of get thrown together. So that's what I was referring to when I said, being given, how it goes all the way back, to those that understand from the very beginning about angels. And you can go all the way from the Old Testament, from Genesis all the way up to Revelation. You will see angels hundreds of times. So it's pretty interesting how he was able to tap into that. And so because of that, that's our best understanding right now of the holy angels. Wouldn't you say, Adam?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, to understand the importance of St. Thomas Aquinas, in seminary, when a priest was in seminary studying to become a priest, for centuries, and still to some extent today, but for centuries, they literally just studied the Summa Theologia in Latin. That was the source of all their theology training. Like there was considered no greater mind has ever written on theology in the history of the church, ever, period. And like at most of the ecumenical councils of the church, they would have his books, his Summa Theologia, and other of his primary texts would be of the reference material at the council, that when in doubt, they would refer to what did Thomas say on this.
Right.
The guy was amazing. Well, let me throw one last curveball in here for you guys as we sort of wrap this show up. There's a topic that has been coming up in the news lately. There was a congressional hearing about UAPs and extraterrestrial life, and so some of these people are reporting that we've got these UAPs, these unidentified anomalous phenomena, which are just sort of whizzing by these different aircraft and stuff. We've even have reports of like obtaining biologics, like biological life from these different unidentified aircraft and whatnot. And so one question that people have is, what are these things, right? Where do they come from? And one hypothesis that a lot of Christians seem to think is a very viable hypothesis is that these things, whatever they are, whatever people seem to be experiencing, whatever is even being caught on radar and, in video cameras and stuff, whatever it is, it finds its source in some sort of like demonic realm. Could this, do you guys find any plausibility here in this hypothesis in explaining this phenomena that we're seeing?
Before Adam answers first, I just want to say we actually did a show on this, on the spirit world, and Adam and I have a little bit different view on this, but I want to hear Adam's take on this first, because I actually did a little bit of study in this area, and it was quite fascinating, and I can see that you have read up on it, Cameron, because and I think it is an interest to people of exactly where these creatures and beings come from, and what do they want from us. Adam, do you want to go first?
Yeah. So my 2 cents on this, Cameron, is we don't know enough to even really come to a confident conclusion. There's so much disinformation. There's so much redacted information. And by disinformation, I mean literally that, like false information that's put out on purpose to confuse an issue. So much that's redacted, that's not released to the public. I think it's impossible to know for sure how much of even the real physical stuff is going on. Now, demons don't have any physicality, though they can move physical things around, but they don't have any physicality. So there's no demonic ship that they're flying around in. Could they create the illusion of they could create the illusion of things within your senses, but there would be no actual physical thing hovering in your yard. But in your senses, you would see it if they had access to your body. It wouldn't be the kind of thing that would show up on a radar. Exactly. And the one area that I do think is sometimes demonic, and oftentimes it's just what are called hypnagogic hallucinations, which is half asleep dreaming and seeing things, is the alien abduction stuff. I think sometimes that's demonic, partly because, and this is not a proof of this, but anecdotally, there's been a number of people that have encouraged people to invoke the name of Jesus during the beginning of these abduction experiences, and they invariably stop immediately when nothing has seemed to have stopped them in the past. I don't think, I think the possibility of like real physical rubbery aliens coming down and, pulling somebody out of their house is vanishingly small chance that that's going on with nothing detecting that. I think it's in the mind of the people where it's a form of torment. The stuff flying around in the sky, I just don't think we know enough. That's my 2 cents.
That seems to me a very reasonable take. I was talking with a friend of mine recently who was outlining something similar. Like it seems much more plausible that these unidentified phenomena are human in origin. That's at least what the intelligence that we know builds these types of things. And there's a whole lot that's out there. Let me rephrase that. There's a whole lot of technology that has been created by the government that we're not familiar with, we're not aware of, and so that seems to me a very reasonable take. Mm-hmm. Debbie, did you have something to add there? Or Adam, it seems like you.
Yeah, Adam, go ahead.
Yeah, just my final thing on that, Cameron. Yeah, I totally agree with you. If you look at, for instance, like the stealth bombers, we tend to be told about something in the public about 30 years after they develop it. So they develop something, they use it secretly because it should be kept secret. It's cutting edge stuff. And typically about 30 plus years later, when it's all declassified and it's no longer the coolest toy, it's now 3 generations old and they're done with it. That's when we hear about it. Mm-hmm. And so, in my lifetime, that's been the pattern. So are we seeing something that is just 30 years ahead of what we think of as cool technology? I think that's much more likely than aliens or demons.
Mm-hmm. So my 2 cents on this, and I'm not, representing the Catholic Church this is just me personally, my thoughts on it, after reading a lot of information, what's out there that we have access to. I remember talking to an incredible priest that I admire so very much. And I asked him after I started to dive into this UFO stuff. And he said to me, Debbie, you got to realize something. There's so much we don't know about what God, can do, will do. We don't really know if God has these other creatures in some other place in the universe. He's God. He can do whatever he wants. So you need to understand that. Don't put limits on God. Okay. So that's the first thing he said to me. And I was like, okay, Father, I got it. I won't put limits on God. But then I started thinking about it. I said, well, Father, I said, okay, could this be a distraction? He said, absolutely. He said, do these so-called aliens, do these so-called encounters, is this going to change our plan of salvation? No. And Adam says this so beautifully every time we work together, stay focused. And again, back to our, the doctor of the church, angelic doctor, St. Thomas Aquinas, we came from God and our goal is to get back to God. And so it's not going to change our plan. So we should not get distracted. Now, do I think that the demons are leveraging it and they're opportunists and they're using this as a way to get people off the mark and off focus? Absolutely. And I'll tell you why. I've read probably 2 inches thick of people that have just lost their whole understanding of God and the holy angels and the demon, everything because of these UFO. They got into it so deeply. It really twisted their brain. And so I think the demons are using it. I don't know necessarily where it comes from, and could it be a highly advanced technology that is well beyond us? Yeah, possibly. But I would say this: it's not. I think the attention we're giving it is not. It's not benefiting us spiritually. How does it serve us? Think about it. Even if these were aliens from somewhere else, how is that going to change our plan to get to heaven? It's, and so I think the time we spend on it is time wasted because we have very limited time here, and our time should be spent trying to get home back to God. And I think this has been a gigantic distraction. What do you say, Adam? I don't know if I've ever shared that with you publicly.
No, the demons will take credit for anything and they will leverage anything that distracts us from God. And so, yeah, I think that's one of the dangers in it. People conflate.
Yeah,
they conflate.
Right.
They conflate spirituality with the UFO stuff as if the UFO stuff discounts or cancels out spirituality.
Exactly. And Adam, you've got groups forming together and they're traveling across country to witness something in the sky that doesn't happen, or they think they saw lights in the sky. I mean, look at the energy, time, and effort. I mean, that is incredibly sad to me. How does that relate to what we know from all of the Bible? It's ridiculous. It doesn't serve us. So why are we doing it? We're doing it because I think it excites us. There's that a fascination about it and an adrenaline rush, and we feel all those things like we're going to uncover this. I think it's a real danger, and I think the sooner we reject it, the better our spiritual lives would be.